So this week we've got Seamus Brett, who's going to be talking to us. So we'll ask Seamus if you can unmute yourself there, Seamus. And I know you've been looking forward to this very much, Seamus. You're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Jude. It's good to be here and glad to be invited on.
Yeah, great to have you on, Seamus. So tell us a little bit about just how long you've been with NCBI, where you're working, things like that.
Okay, well, I joined NCBI in 1999 in my current role as a rehabilitation and IT worker. I'm based in County Sligo and I cover the areas of Donegal, Leitrim and Sligo. But previous to that, I did work with NCBI as a community resource worker from 1996 to 1997 as well.
Okay, very good. So maybe you could tell us just a little bit of your background then. What was the story before you joined NCBI? What sort of what area were you interested in, or what were you doing in college, or any of those sort of things?
Okay, well, I suppose I was one of those people that when I was a younger person, I hadn't a clue what I wanted to do in life, and I suppose the advice at the time was to people like me was to try and study something you like, that you're interested in, and also to do something very general. If you don't know what you want to do something generic, and then you can specialize when you do know. And I think that was very good advice for someone like me. So I suppose I started off by ended up doing a BA degree in English history and philosophy, starting out, which didn't qualify me for anything, but it was just a good starting point.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. And then afterwards, I was doing kind of bits of working with in different jobs that came up, and voluntary work and different things. And along the way, I kind of found out that I like working with people. And I suppose specifically, I found that I liked working in a role where I can help other people. And I know I did a kind of a volunteer stint with the Simon in Cork, Simon community, and I absolutely loved it. It was absolutely fascinating. It was completely off. There was no rules at all, but it was wonderful working with people who were on the margins of society, and you got an insight into life it was incredible, and I never forget it. But coming from that, I realized that I like working with people, and I wanted to work in a role where I could help other people. So following on from that, I went on and I did a higher diploma, I suppose, in social studies. And after doing that, I then worked again with homeless services for a while. I worked with young people, and I worked in community development before coming to NCBI. So I quite a varied background, I suppose.
Yeah. It's interesting though, just as you're describing that, just that kind of process I think a lot of people go through of just trying to work out what they want to do. But that thing of wanting to work with people and help people was clearly a strong thing in your life beforehand.
It came very clear, but when I was in secondary school, I really didn't know, and I have great sympathy for younger people nowadays, because the amount of courses and things, the options are so vast and so wide that, whereas my time there might have been maybe 700 or 800 courses, now there's maybe 7,000 or 8,000 courses if you go international as well or whatever. There's so many options. So I suppose the only advice I'd ever give to the next generation I say, whatever you like doing, that's the way to go. Choose what you like. Don't do something that you don't like.
Interesting. And I'd imagine as well that kind of that thing that you discovered about yourself, that you liked to help people and work with people, that certainly would have found a kind of a good home in NCBI. So what does your role at NCBI involve at the moment?
Okay, well, I suppose my role is quite a broad role. It has largely two parts in it. It's mostly IT, which would be, I suppose we call it AT now, AT training and AT support, both with individuals and with groups. So that would be a big part of my role. By phone, by email, by telephone, and now online using Microsoft Teams, and before this period of lockdowns and that, mostly face-to-face as well. And the other part of my role would be providing orientation and mobility training. And currently I provide orientation and mobility training for anybody who needs it in County Sligo.
Okay.
Like in every county.
So what does that involve? What sort of things does the orientation and mobility training involve?
Well, I suppose in every county there's at least one member of staff who will be trained to provide orientation and mobility training. So when a person is referred to NCBI and the community resource worker will do their initial assessment, some of the areas they will look at will be how they're managing in both familiar environments and unfamiliar environments. How's their general mobility, their level of confidence in that? And if that's flagged as an area where somebody is saying, well, I have difficulty in my local area now, I'm afraid to cross roads, or I need help in unfamiliar areas or whatever, the community resource worker will then discuss and say, well, we have somebody who's trained to work with people and to assist people to build confidence in areas like mobility. And would you be interested in talking to that person and seeing, and they could discuss the options with you and give you.
Yeah.
And if someone is like, it's never mandatory, but if someone is interested in pursuing that, then they would be referred to me, say in County Sligo, and I would get that referral, and I'd initially maybe make a phone call, and then I would usually meet them face to face. I'd have all their, I suppose, information and my bit of homework done beforehand. I discuss the difficulties, and then I might get them, if they're willing, to come out into the local, either their local area or the local town, and observe them how they work in a real environment, road crossings, curbs, other pedestrians, obstacles, all of those things, different lighting conditions. Then we talk about it and say, this is what I observed. And then we'd say, I give them the options, either it's kind of how to use the residual vision to the best effect, or maybe looking at using a mobility aid like a symbol cane or a guide cane or a long cane and providing some training in that. But it's all about building confidence for the person to retain their independence, and not to lose more ground, basically.
Yeah, very good. So with that, would you find that like there are general rules and techniques that if you learn these, you'll be okay in any environment, or does somebody also need maybe training in sort of a specific place, or is it a bit of a mix of both?
I think it's a bit of a mix of both. I think everybody's an individual, so you kind of start with the individual, what the individual, what they're willing to do, what they're interested in doing, and then you look at what they can do currently with the level of vision they have, and then there is like set techniques for using a long cane or sighted guide, or mobility, the set techniques, and you will use the set techniques, but you'll adapt them to each person, and you always do it in conjunction with the person, so the person is agreeable. And if the person isn't, you work with the person rather than saying this is the way it is. So I would never be a completely by the book person. I would say this is what the standard recommended approach is. What are you happy with? What will work for you? So it's it's a mixture of both, really.
Yeah, very good. So that's the kind of orientation mobility side, and as you mentioned, you're doing a lot of IT support as well in this changed environment as well. Anything particular you're working on at the moment?
Well, I suppose there will be two things that come to mind. That I suppose, like everybody in this period of COVID-19, like I've had to, and everybody has had to try and adapt to a new situation and try and see how many services, how much of our services can we provide remotely and online using things like Microsoft Teams. And I suppose that's been challenging, but I suppose it also we've discovered that you can do quite a lot online. A lot of stuff can be delivered virtually, not everything, but a lot of things can. I suppose two things that are coming to mind will be I've worked with some with young school children and that, and I've been asked to got involved with providing, I suppose, assistive AT training with children either in the school holiday period or in the evenings, to children using Microsoft Teams, and they would log on to get an email with a link to join a meeting like this one, and they would come on and they would do different courses. Like I suppose some of the course we've done would be Microsoft Word with keyboard shortcuts, and I think starting this evening we're doing another one on file and folder management with keyboard shortcuts. And it's open for any child in the whole country who, or if a parent feels that their child maybe would benefit from this, they can they can log in and join that class. So that's been very it's been challenging but very rewarding as well. I just find the kids' enthusiasm to learn is wonderful, and you just get an energy from those young people. It's brilliant.
Very good. So for that one, if somebody is listening and they're thinking actually somebody in their family might be interested in this, do they contact their local IT trainer? Do they contact their local CRW?
Yeah, if they have contact with the local IT trainer, they could ask them and say, listen, I've heard that there's kind of courses for children, offered in the school holidays or in at the evening time, could you kind of get me involved, or LinkedIn if they're not already LinkedIn. Now, they also, if they have a children's worker, most children will have an NCBI children's worker, and I suppose they would be well placed to tell them what courses are coming up. And I think there's a calendar of events that's sent out to parents regularly, but there's so much stuff comes at parents that they might have missed it. But definitely, if a parent is interested and says, I think my child, is a bit, isn't that confident using, say, folders in subjects for school or different things like that, and they could benefit from that, then by all means just make contact with your local IT worker or the local children's worker, and they will get you LinkedIn.
Very good. And of course, one of the things that everybody's doing at the moment, and you kind of alluded to it there as well, is that we're kind of trying to find new ways to work. That leads to some interesting kind of experiments at times, doesn't it? Even in terms, I know you were mentioning about orientation and mobility, just even looking into how that might be applied.
Yeah, I've been involved in a project, and it has been a very interesting project. And I suppose arising from this, the first lockdown in March, I was asked with a few other staff to look at the feasibility of providing virtual orientation and mobility training. And arising from that, we researched it online, what was being done around different areas around the world, what kind of equipment did we need. So we basically what it involves is we've done a few tests with a number of service users who are agreeable to do it, where the service user would wear a smartphone, usually an iPhone, strapped to a chest harness that they wear, and it live streams video footage of their environment to somebody like me who would be logging in remotely through my laptop. So I can see through my laptop exactly what their camera is picking up as it's angled ahead of them to pick up curbs and steps and all of that. And then they would wear a pair of bone conducting headphones, which would enable me to communicate with that person, but also maybe for them to communicate with me, and maybe to pick up some background sounds as well from traffic and things like that. So we've done a couple of trials with that, and I suppose it definitely has potential. And I think as the technology develops, it will be one of the tools for the future. What we found so far is that really, because of things like you're relying with the video, you're relying on a network signal, a consistent network signal. At times the video is very clear, other times it becomes very blurred. Sometimes the audio will cut in and out a wee bit. So we found that for the moment you need a support person, either a trained person or a family member with knowledge to support the person on the ground in case the technology would fail or whatever. I suppose our criteria would be that the person's safety is the primary thing, and we have to be 100% certain of that. But I do think it's been very interesting, and I think it has potential. I just think the technology needs a bit more development, but it definitely is a tool for the future.
So is that something that is being kind of offered widely around the country, or is it still in a sort of fairly controlled sort of testing kind of? It's
still very much in a controlled testing, kind of a pilot project on a very limited basis, and we chose a number of service users who would be in different parts of the country, who would be very competent, either using a cane or a guide dog or whatever, to test it out. And one of the staff members would be the support person, and then the 3 staff members involved. So the other 2 would then log in remotely and provide the instruction. So we've done a number of tests, and I suppose we're in the process of feeding back to management to say what we feel as people who provide mobility training, what we feel in terms of the potential of this. And I suppose what we feel at the moment is that it needs further development. I think if it was that we could be 100% certain of it, I think probably our NCBI would be interested, but they'd have to be certain that it was 100% safe, and it was the technology was going to, it wasn't going to be patchy or whatever. It needs to be consistent for to safely provide instruction to somebody. It's putting them out in a real life environment. You really have to have it 100%.
Very good. Well, it's certainly interesting to hear about those different ways that you're trying to complete the work that you're doing in this kind of environment as well. It's interesting to hear about them, and it's nice just to get a bit of a chance to chat to you as well today. Thanks for joining us, Seamus. Appreciate that.
Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.